So with that, I'm very excited again to introduce Lisa Neal. Lisa is our Ombuds officer for the CU Anschutz campus. I've done a lot of work with Lisa around conflict management. Lisa and Ombuds are a great resource on campus anytime you're trying to navigate some difficult situation, both in helping identify for your own goals and interests, what do you want to get out of this situation, but then figure out what options do you have, what resources do you have, right down to structuring some of the dialogue about how do I actually bring this up to, get out of this conversation what I want. And that's really what we're going to talk about today, which is this challenging topic for a lot of students and postdocs, and actually a lot of people who are in situations where there's a significant power dynamic and differential. And I think for trainees, you're oftentimes in a very difficult spot because your research advisor or mentor has tremendous power over what options you have going forward, right? That letter of recommendation is that kind of thing that is always in the back of your mind. And so these already uncomfortable conversations about how do you ask for a raise, or how do you advocate for some kind of change, or say, I think your expectations for what my workload is right now are unrealistic. Those conversations that are always difficult take on an even greater sense of importance because, well, shoot, I need this person to write me a good letter of recommendation when this is all done. And so that's what we're going to touch on today. Lisa does a lot of other conflict management workshops. We have those listed on the CDO events calendar. I would encourage you to attend these little lunch and learns that they do on that. But today we're specifically going to talk about some of the challenges that arise for trainees and how to empower you all to have these conversations when you're also trying to navigate a power dynamic. And so with that, I will be quiet and turn it over to Lisa Neal.
That wasn't your cue to be quiet, but I just thought I'd put it up so that
people know that I don't listen to those cues anyway, so I'm going to try to be quiet to the best that I can.
Right on, right on. Well, hi everyone. Thank you, Bruce, for inviting me and for allowing me to introduce some ideas and possibly some skills for you in navigating these really difficult situations. And I'm very mindful of that power dynamic. I've been with the university for going on 16 years. So I've seen it play out in a lot of different ways and know that there's not one way to resolve these, and there's not one magical way to address them as well. And that's why if you feel after today that a conversation between the two of us could be really helpful for your situation specifically, I'm really happy to walk you through that, because this is a template, but it's, like I said, it's not a magic wand for addressing these. In our office, we are confidential. We don't disclose to anybody that you've come in. Our only exception is imminent harm. I'm not even a mandatory reporter. So I do have trainees come to me to talk about authorship issues, research misconduct issues, bad or poor behavior of mentors, PIs, and I don't do anything with that information. That's not my job. My job is to help that person that I'm talking with in the moment there, to give you resources and to help you figure out what you'd like to see happen. I don't even give advice because I don't walk in your shoes, so to speak, but I can give you options and resources for how to address that. So that's briefly what we do. And I think maybe at the end, Bruce, would be nice. I don't know if I've been introduced over email, and my email address is there, as well as my website that could give you more information, how you might get in touch with me afterwards, if that would be helpful. So our office deals with conflict, and you might look back on your education as much as it is, and maybe do a little audit of how many classes or workshops you've done around conflict. I bet we'd be on just one hand if you were to count. Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Tyler. Two, right. So, and in the United States, I've noticed as I do these trainings that we don't teach people in our society how to manage conflict. And the irony with that is conflict is everywhere. It's always going to be there. So why don't we have a better toolkit for doing this? So as I walk through these with you, these are some strategies and some skills that you could consider employing. And always happy to help you with a script, like Bruce said, moving forward. So one of the best things that I was ever introduced to is crucial conversations. I'm going to introduce an idea from that called CPR. As well as this idea around stories. And then I'm going to give you a chance to practice. And that's where Bruce put in the chat a template where you could type in if that's helpful for you. And then because we're over Zoom and remote and can't really connect like we used to, I'm going to give you some polls where you can participate. And you're always welcome to participate through the chat as well. So you can do this a couple different ways. You can use your cell phone to do this, and the person that you text to is 37607, and then the message that you send is my name 831, or you can go into your browser and type in polev.com/myname831. So I'm going to give you just a second to maybe get that set up. And I have a poll following right after this slide if you'd like to participate. And these responses will be anonymous. So I won't even know who this is. I won't even know if, I'll probably know if just one person participates, but I'm not going to monitor that. Maybe you guys have been using Poll Everywhere or some sort of polling system since we've gone remote. And so this is a little bit more familiar to you. Okay, here's our first question. Let's get a sense of how often power plays into how you might resolve issues in your lab. And this doesn't just have to be with your mentor. This could be with other people in the lab. Okay. All right, so it seems for half of you all the time, power is always kind of ever present. For some of you, it's going to depend on the situation. All right, here's our next question. How do power differentials, either positive or negative, impact your work? These are open-ended questions. This is an open-ended question. How does this impact you when you're having to deal with power? And I just want to make sure that this is on. Here we go. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you have to modify depending on the person. How will they respond? It's not just about what you want. You're stuck between a rock and a hard place. So for those of you who are trainees, okay, overthinking, sure. I'm an outsider here. I've never been a postdoc or a trainee, but any postdocs who feel like they're second in command of the lab, like the second most ranking person in the lab, does that give you a sense of, I have more power in the lab than a PRA? Okay. Feel like you can't discuss things openly? All right, you're empowered if you have a good relationship. You're kind of disempowered if it's ambiguous or if it's maybe strained. How about that assumption I made? Are you as trainees, for those of you who are trainees, do you consider yourself the second in command in the lab? Does that give you a sense of power? Bruce is chuckling over there. I can see it. Okay. You got priority to come back to the lab. You're feeling disempowered. Okay, sure. Sure. Is that because your PI holds all the power, or is it distributed amongst others in the lab? Okay. Okay. You can see here that maybe if you were feeling like you had a strained relationship or ambiguous relationship, you're not the only one. Okay. You have some power to purchase with your own grant money. Yeah, that's your grant money. Sure. There's some power there for sure. All right, I'm going to move us along. When you are in the lab, what do you feel you do in conflict, or is it situation dependent? Do you run away? Do you avoid, or oops, do you fight? And is it dependent on the person? So let's get a sense here. In the lab, when you're in conflict, are you more likely to use one method, or is it dependent on the person? So this might be your go-to in conflict. This might be your go-to at work. And this could be totally different. If you're at home, is the answer going to be different, right? Okay. At home, I'm really badly behaving. You know, like I'll stand up for myself. I might, like, I'm not as nice as I might be at work and just polite because I've got a job on the line, right? And we have a lot on the line at work. Whereas what's my family going to do? Are they going to kick me out of the house? I don't think so. So I think I have more leeway there. So however you are in any situation, that's really important to know. Like, what am I going to do? And so this is going to fight or flight. And in Crucial Conversations, they talk about fight. They call it violence. And some people don't like that. Some people say, you know, I might go to fight and I'm not being physically violent. All right. But in Crucial Conversations land, it sounds like anything you do to compel someone to go along with you or to see your point of view. So it could look like talking over people, interrupting, yelling, labeling, okay, raising your voice. Examples of flight. This means any action you take to keep information out. So, and think about as your lab makes decisions, if you keep quiet or if you shut somebody else down, there's information there that's not being shared. And so you're not making the best decisions as a lab, if that makes sense. So silence or flight can look like, you know, just withdrawing, masking, saying, oh, it's okay. It's okay. Completely avoiding that person or the situation. It can look like you change the subject, you give in, maybe those passive aggressive comments come out, you ignore them. Okay. So again, the cost of doing either one of these is that information lapse. We're not getting all that information. And so what the ultimate goal is here is dialogue. And that's not always easy to do. Okay. So, but we see when in conflict, see if this looks right to, so I'll ask you this. If most of you are in silence in the lab, okay, what's your PI doing? Is your PI going to fight or is your PI going to flight? Be really good for you just to know. And this isn't a personality assessment. This is just how you are in conflict. I'm most likely to go here in conflict at work. It's just good to know. I'm most likely, I'm going to shut down at work. I know that about myself. How do I get myself out of that? I'm doing a self-protective measure. Okay. As might my PI who's yelling. That's a little harder to wrap your head around. But when we go to fight or flight, the main takeaway I want you to have from here is we don't feel safe. Easy to understand that when I withdraw that I don't feel safe, but the same is true when somebody tries to control the conversation. They don't feel safe in letting it go and letting others talk. They feel like they have to control it. They're feeling out of control. Okay, so that engenders some compassion for me. Especially if somebody's getting really agitated, I think, okay, I have to remind myself they don't feel safe. It's a little easier to do when they are going to silence. All right, so when we are in conflict, tick all the things that resonate with you. You know, when I'm in conflict, these are the things that I want to do. Here are also some motives in conflict. Feel free to put in the chat or unmute yourself. What do you see as the difference between these two blocks?
The right one is maybe a bit more productive than the left.
Yes, exactly. That's great. That's one. What's another?
I suppose the one on the left is more sort of immediate, short term, sort of in the moment, and the one to the right is more or less, has long term goals, views, objectives, and as just mentioned, sort of productivity or sort of progress in mind, I guess.
Terrific. Exactly. One's short term, one's long term. How about one more?
So there are a couple in the chat coming in there, Lisa. I don't know if you can see the chat. You want me to read them?
Yes, please.
So the right side is about self or growth, transformation, and learning. Left sounds more victory oriented, and the other more about growth. For me, I see the one on the left, and I feel like that's in some ways driven by fear of something, right? Your fear of being undermined, fear of not being, your authoritized, not being respected, all of those things. I was hoping too that you might comment on one of the things here that I think is, for me, really instructive is when you're in that moment of conflict and you're in a position where someone with more power is the one who is more in that kind of violence phase, whether that's raising their voice or just making sharp, undercutting comments for things, to think about those actions through the lens of what is that person, which of these might be contributing to some of that for someone, when from this side it feels like, well, what would they be insecure about? They're the head of the lab, they have all the power, they have that, like, they're in that position. So any comments you have on that, I think would be interesting, because I think that's one way to think about some of these things.
Right. It seems impossible that somebody with all this power, prestige, reputation could feel unsafe. I think sometimes people in power feel like they're being undermined. It may not even be about you, but they're taking it out on you. You know, the pressures to run a lab and to continually get funding, that may come out as well. And I think being able to say things that calm them down a little bit or make them feel a little safer might sound like, I want you to know I see you as the authority here, or I want you to know that I want to have a really good collaborative working relationship with you, or I want you to know that I see you as the decision maker in this process. So that may calm them down because they may feel one way, whether it's logical or not. Sometimes, I mean, this just kicks in so fast. But unless I knew some specifics, those are my best three, best worst three off the top of my head. But we can talk about this as we go along. So thank you for bringing that up, Bruce. The one last thing I will say between these two blocks is one is me and one is we. Okay, so the one on the left is all about me, and the one on the right is about us. So what you really want when you notice, okay, I'm gone to fight or flight, I want to ask myself, what do I really want long term? That's what's going to get the blood back into my brain. And that long-term piece is really helpful. What do I really want long-term? Well, I want to have a good working relationship with this person, or I want to have a good personal relationship with this person. You could probably use those two statements for anybody, any situation in your life. You don't have to like them. You don't have to be friends with them, but you may have to work with them. They may be part of your family that you can't kick them out. Okay, so I want to have a good personal relationship with this person. And so I think that that's a nice universal statement to make. So that's what we're doing here, is we're getting ourselves out of the reptilian brain and getting our brain to start thinking. And that's where the blood goes back to our brain. Okay, I want to have a good relationship with this person. Okay, and doing this sends that message, you're not in danger anymore. Okay. One thing we say is we are terrible actors. And so if we say, you know, I'm just going to fake it till I make it, you are still giving off vibes that, you know, indicate otherwise. Okay. All right. So any questions or comments on this? Could you do this? Is this something you feel like you could, you know, sticky note, remind yourself, practice on your family and your friends? Anybody see any banana peels with this idea?
So I want to make one comment because I think it's a good place to insert it. For one, we do these workshops, and I think sometimes, you know, whether it's this, whether it's the emotional intelligence workshop, all of this takes a lot of really hard work and repetition, and it's difficult to do. And so, you know, keep that in mind as you're going through it. You know, it's like, okay, cerebrally, I know that I'm supposed to think about what is my line, but right here, I'm like, no, right? Like, so getting yourself out of that action. And then for me, one of the things that I find really difficult as I've had some of these interactions is like, but I don't want to have a good relationship with this person because they're a problem and it needs to be, you know, and so, you know, it takes a lot of work to really step back and say, all right, here's what I do need though. I want to be successful in the things that I'm trying to accomplish. And in order for that, I need to have this functional relationship. And so, you know, I just want to put a little voice to how hard that really can be sometimes as you try to do some of these.
Thank you for that, Bruce. And the story that we're going to get into, the story that we tell ourselves about that person becomes all encompassing. And it's, you know, there's no other way to look at it. You know, they're just a jerk, period. And why would you want to work with that person? Okay. And so we're going to start talking this next section around facts and stories. So you all are all factually based. Which of these are facts? So I teach this content about, I don't know, six times a year. And I always ask this question. And it's always so interesting to me how people are oriented. Like you're scientists, but we are storytellers as human beings. We are not factual tellers. We're storytellers because we're trying to make sense of what we see in the world. Okay, so the only fact on here is that that could be construed as a fact is you looked at your phone 5 times today, because that's quantifiable. We can verify that. I do not think it is hot outside today. In fact, I have my heater going, right? So, but if I said it's 73 degrees out today, that's better, right? That's something measurable, right? But just notice that, and as you hear people talk, my colleague Teresa always recommends, for many reasons, some are not very valid, but like watching shows, reality shows like The Bachelor and The Bachelorette. And she said, you know, when you watch those shows, it's story after story after story. There's zero fact. And it's a microcosm of how we are as humans. Okay. All right. How do you make sense of something like this? What story do you tell yourself? We're still doing some driving, so this possibly could happen. Someone want to put in the chat or unmute yourself? What just happened? How do I make sense of that?
I know the story I tell myself depends on the mood I'm in.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
But usually I try to tell myself, oh, like that person must be in a rush. They must be late for something.
Sure. Okay. There's one story. Who might tell themselves a different story? Maybe a story that has expletives involved, right? All right. How about this one? And I want you to think of your gut reaction. All right. Let's not overthink this. We don't have to show off for each other. I'm so kind. I appreciate Allison. You're so kind on the road. You're one of the few. But like your first initial reaction is what? Anybody irritated?
Yeah, initially irritated, and then like, or like a little, yeah, perhaps a little bit panicked at first, and then irritated that I'm being put off by the interaction.
Okay, sure. And a little panicked, meaning, oh my gosh, was I supposed to do that?
Yeah, exactly. Like,
Okay.
there's an expectation I'm not aware of. Now I'm not meeting it, and now I'm going to redirect the blame towards the person who's making me feel this way.
Exactly.
But most of that's internal.
There's another panic that was shared in the chat, and then a comment about depends on the situation and how they ask.
Sure. Absolutely. That tone of voice is huge.
So another ask for a deadline if I don't know it already. And for me, this is a big thing that I'm really trying to pay attention to, is defensiveness.
Yeah.
For that is, wait a minute, but I'm doing this or that, the other, right? That's that initial response to something like, when are you going to be done with that thing? Is a defensive reaction. Yep.
Or you're riding the bus and a father is not correcting his children's abhorrent behavior. Okay, there's my story, right? The reason I'm bringing all of these up is because of this theory. And it's human nature to give ourselves a pass for the same behavior and attribute negatively to those other people. Okay, so they cut me off because they're a jerk. But if I cut somebody off, I'm busy. I have things to do, so I'm totally justified in doing that. Or if I ask for a file, I may have many reasons to do that. If I don't tell my kids, to stop switching seats on the bus, there's a famous story about that this father just lost his wife. And so he was just in shock, and these kids are on this bus. There's a lot of reasons that we don't know why people are acting that way, but we are more likely to attribute negative motives to why they're doing that and positive motives to ourselves. It's just how we're oriented, okay? And then part of that is that when we do that, then we leak, and people know that we are irritated, that we are disapproving of their behavior, because of the words we choose, our body language, our tone of voice. Okay. So what we've told ourselves with the driving, with the file, with the father on the bus is an unhelpful story. It's a negative story. And so what's the cost of that, do you think?
Causing us more stress.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so stress. What might that do to the relationship?
Yeah, I mean, I guess like maybe, if you're telling a bad story about someone else, then you might have more negative feelings towards that person and treat them worse.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's going to affect your relationship, the treatment of them. Okay. So I want you to take a second and think of somebody challenging in your life. It doesn't have to be at work. Either so it's family, neighbor, friends, a friend of a friend, somebody at the university, somebody you have a hard time empathizing with, or you lose your cool with, or you tell yourself negative stories. Okay. We're going to describe them here in the poll. Unreliable. Yep. Difficult. Yep. Arrogant. Sure. Dense. Yeah. Okay. Controlling. Absent. Yeah. Okay. Annoying. Jerk face. Absolutely. All right. All of these, are these facts or stories? These are all stories. Every single one of them is a story. But that doesn't mean that, let's take an easy one, unreliable. That doesn't mean that we couldn't have a conversation with somebody and lay out the facts that make us conclude that they're unreliable. All right. And I think that can be really helpful. That can be really compelling. All right. So here's where we look at the difference. Facts are observable. That's how the actual temperature out today, or 5 times you looked at your phone. And then our stories, unreliable, jerk face, dense. Okay. This is so important. And this is where we're getting is, if you can control the story, you can control your emotions. So if you tell yourself a positive story about somebody, you're controlling your emotions. Likewise, if you're telling a negative story about somebody, you're out of control. Now your story's controlling you. All right. And I think most of us want to feel in control as much as possible. So we want to be in the driver's seat of our emotions. All right. We've got control over the stories. The facts are the facts. This is where stories, origin of emotions. First, we see and hear something, and then we make sense of it. Okay, so what did that person say or do that made you tell the story that they're unreliable? And so as soon as you say that person's unreliable, you feel a certain way, and then you act a certain way. But if you were able to say something and just keep yourself emotionally regulated, which, by the way, is 90% of any conflict. If you can remain emotionally regulated and agile, you are winning in a conflict. And you're not winning the conflict, you're going to get into dialogue. You're going to be productive, and you're going to influence around you. So what good story could you tell yourself about this person? So the people that you put up in the poll, can you think real quickly of a positive story you could tell yourself about that person? Because if you look back, there's probably not a lot of facts there with your challenging person. There's more story than anything else. And so this is an activity for you. And maybe it's an assignment, put it on a Post-it note. What is a positive story you could tell yourself about this person? Only so that when you begin to engage in that conversation with them, you're emotionally regulated. That is the goal. So doing work on yourself first is so important in a conversation, an important conversation. It's not going to go well if you have a negative story in your head. Does that make sense? Okay. So there's one thing to do, your challenging story, and you're always welcome to reach out to me and say, but Lisa, they don't do anything right. They are a jerk face. They are unreliable. I am really happy to go down that hole, that rabbit hole with you and talk to you about, help you separate the facts from the stories. But here's how we get behaviorally specific. If I say they're a jerk face, what do they say or do that makes me feel that they're being a jerk face? And how do I know that? Well, they interrupt me. All right, there's a fact. You interrupted me 3 times. They talk over me. So these are all verifiable. You waved your hands at me and said, stop. You can quote people as well. Okay. That's how you know that. Creating a positive story, that's how we humanize others. And I always ask this question, how true does this positive story have to be? All right. And it doesn't have, don't start looking for holes in your positive story. All right. Because the goal is being emotionally regulated. Okay. And what you want to be able to get behind that story, needs to be mostly true. What could be some right here?
Hey, Lisa, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
With that? So the examples about having the behaviorally specific facts, is that something, when you're structuring the conversation, using those facts as the discussion point becomes important. But at this place, is the suggestion that you want to start doing that to help craft the positive story that's based on facts? Or are you saying that you wouldn't already be engaging in that conversation yet, right? Like this is used to orient yourself to thinking about, okay, why might they be acting this way? Really, what did they do? Using the facts for that. Is that more?
Right.
Yeah.
We haven't opened our mouth yet with this other person. This is all pre-work. Thank you for that. This is all pre-work. Like, what story am I telling myself? Because that's driving my behavior. So I want to stop doing that. I want to be emotionally agile, and I want to be giving off good vibes. Like, you can talk to me. My motive, what's my motive? I want to have a good relationship with this person. Okay. So a positive story you could get behind. They're busy with something at home, or they're going through a lot right now. She's a good mom. She loves her kids. Her dog loves her. He donates a lot to charity. He cares about the work that we're doing. Yeah, they're worried right now. They're stressed. It must be really they must be really stressed right now. That generates some compassion. Funding issues, COVID. It's not about me, which sometimes, a lot of times it's not. That doesn't help when you're being treated this way necessarily, but what you want is to be in charge and in control of your own emotions. All right, so we haven't opened our mouth yet. We're still, trying to get emotionally regulated. Now what we need to do is we need to figure out, I'm going to choose one of these to lead with. And this is a problem that we're trying to solve. And do I come at it from a content perspective, a pattern perspective or a relationship perspective. And I rarely go with content. It needs to be pretty egregious for me to go with content. I usually go with pattern or relationship. Those seem to be pretty compelling. It's happening over time. This is getting concerning, or I'm losing trust in our relationship because of this. Okay, so those are the ones that I go with. And so I try and get facts that would support pattern or facts that would support relationship. All right, so what do you think you'd do here? You think it's important to orient your conversation around content, pattern, or relationship? And we'll do a poll here in a second, but I want you to read this first. All right, so if you had to choose content, pattern, or relationship, what's going to be the most compelling? This is great. You could go with either one, pattern or relationship. If you went with content and the crux of your conversation was you need to do your part, Skippy could come back and say, I've just been busy. I'll catch you next time. And then you're kind of dead in the water there. That's not a compelling conversation. But if you're able to say, this is a pattern that keeps happening, and the story I'm telling myself is that you're doing this on purpose. Or we agreed to do this. We agreed to share the responsibility, and you're getting out of it each time. And so now I'm worried I can't trust you to do your part. People tend to listen a little bit more when it's compelling like that. Oh, I didn't know I was coming across that way. All right, so this is in your template, and Bruce put in the chat. And let me just say this, you're gonna know just enough after today to be dangerous. So I wouldn't do this without, call me or Zoom me. Let's practice this. Let's set this up. These are things for you to just start thinking about, writing about. But if you really want to structure a conversation to have with somebody, let me help you work on that. I'm one of the trainers for Crucial Conversations, so I do this with people a lot. But this is just to get your mind thinking about ways to set up a conversation that are probably different than you've been doing in the past. Okay, so I want you to know this cuts through any misunderstandings. And I said a couple of those initially when Bruce asked about, how can a powerful mentor think or feel unsafe? All right. And one of the things I said was maybe they feel like you're trying to undermine them, or that you're questioning their, what did I say? Not capabilities, but who's making the decisions. So it could sound something like, I want you to know I see you as the decision maker on this paper. That might calm them down, make them feel safe. The facts. I emailed you twice last week about being first author. I haven't heard back yet. And now Skippy, who is a new PRA, told me you said he could be first author. The conclusion I'm coming to, I'm beginning to worry that there's a miscommunication here, or I'm beginning to worry that because Skippy's dad and you are best friends, you're more likely to give him this place. And then the ask, is that what's going on, or am I missing something? So these are all good asks, and I want you to tell me what the difference is between the bads. What's the difference between the good asks and the bad asks?
The bad asks sound accusatory.
Yeah, absolutely. And how's that going to go? Right? And
You're kind of making like an assumption with like
Yeah.
that asks.
Right. And remember, I was talking about silence and violence, and in between that is dialogue. And so that's what your goal should be, is to get them talking. And you're not going to get them talking if you have a closed sentence. Is that true? Yes or no? That's binary. We want something open. You're also not going to get there if you're already accusing them. Can we make sure this doesn't happen again, without even hearing from them? Okay. Or guessing, is this happening because your wife just left you, right? These are not helpful. And you're not going to get into dialogue this way. But open-ended right here. And if you don't, I always tell people, put these on a Post-it note, use these over and over and over, find one that works for you over time. But these are all good that are open-ended and get that person talking, which is really what you want. Now, I have a little bit of an example coming up. I know we only have 5 more minutes left, but if I'm moving too fast and you guys want to talk about some things, holler in the chat. Otherwise, I'll move on, but I'll give you a second to ask any questions, or please push back. You know, how could this work if ...
So Lisa, just as people are sharing questions they may have, I was gonna say that I think one of the things, if people do get to the point of actually structuring these conversations, and one of those benefits that Zoom actually provides is you can have your notes with you when you're having that Zoom conversation to go through some of this. I was actually hoping you might comment too on, when thinking about content, pattern, and relationship, knowing the pattern and relationship are those better approaches for things, how might that show up in things that are more productive or less productive when there's a big power differential? Like if this is the lab head who is, you know, kind of, so using the example of the authorship on the paper, do you see in situations like that, I would worry about saying, you know, because of this, I feel like you're not really invested in my success as a trainee. That would be scary for me to say something like that. Because that feels very direct and confrontational still about those things. And maybe that's because I arrived at the wrong way to say that. But do you feel like there is, you know, thinking about relationship or pattern with a power differential in mind, does that kind of lean one way or the other, recognizing that obviously individual differences will come into play?
I think that's a really good point, and thank you for bringing that up. I might go with a softer approach with the authorship, and you know, my goal is dialogue. My goal is not to offend. You know, when I work with people in conflict, sometimes they're like, I'm just honest. I'm a brutally honest person, and I just tell it like it is. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, I would imagine that you don't have a lot of productive conversations as a result. So if I'm going to be brutally honest with you, I'm being mean, and I'm not in dialogue with you. So my softer pitch with the PI might be something around relationship. I want to have a collaborative relationship with you. The story I'm telling myself, or I'm beginning to worry that we have a misconnection here. There's a starting point there. How do you see it? And if your PI comes back and says, well, no, you're right, you know, Skippy, I need to give this to Skippy because his dad really wants him to be successful in science. Okay. That's when you that's when you're like, that's really helpful information. I'm going to need to come back to you on this because this is important for me. Can we have another conversation another time? And then you need to, you know, call your resources. You need to call Bruce. You need to call me. How do you set this up another time? Because you may be so flooded with fight or flight that you may not be able to, you know, have a good conversation, but at least, you know, now you've got some more data. I don't know how realistic that situation is in that, but I mean, there's always things I have never heard before that I continue to hear that it's a head scratcher. That's new. I haven't heard that. So I'm always happy to help you navigate and help you figure out what options you have and what resources are available to you. There are examples in the PowerPoint that you'll get from Bruce that you can use your template with. Because I know that we're just right at noon. So feel free to look at those and work on the template if that feels helpful for you. If you'd like to reach out, and I don't know, Bruce, about the email. Do you want me to put my email address in here?
So yeah, you could do it right now. I put the email in the chat one earlier time too. I will send that just with a little follow-up that sends a link to some of the resources again. So we'll get that out additional times. And then I'm going to throw into the chat right now as well a link to an evaluation that I would ask everybody to fill out if you just take a quick minute to do that so we can get some feedback on this session. I think, again, one of the things that I really got out of today's session with this too is that I think we lose sight of how important it is before we enter into any conflict to identify what do we want to get out of this situation. And you know, putting ourselves in a position where we can have a plan becomes important. You know, the process of navigating these power differentials, it's not going to go away. There are facts there. It is important to have a positive letter of recommendation from someone. There is a lot of power there, but that doesn't mean that you have no voice in advocating for things that you need in that situation. It's just, how do you go about structuring these conversations? And so I hope that's something that other people got out of this too, that this is a process to start, that this takes time and intentionality, and that Lisa is here. There are resources here to help you in that process if you want, if you feel that you need to engage in some of these conversations. I think these skills are things that you can use across the board, whether it's in your personal life, in your professional life, when there are more balances in power. But again, it's the same structure that really comes to play when you're trying to have these more challenging conversations.
And I do feel like for those of you, especially who feel like you're going to go on and you want to run your own lab, the skills in crucial conversation are the basics for managing conflict. You're going to have so many conflicts in lab, but also in your personal life, professional life, all that. These are just skills that can really help you be successful. So if you feel like you're in a place to advocate with your PI to get the funding to attend these, it's $265. And if you use them, like I put in here, that it's a muscle, your muscles get stronger, they can be a game changer in your life. So I can't proselytize enough about crucial conversations just as a foundation for managing conflict.
So again, I put the link to the evaluation in the chat. I definitely want to thank Lisa very much for the session. I hope that you all continue to turn to her as a resource when you have some of these challenging conversations as they come up. I'm happy to keep it open and hang out for a little bit if you have some other questions that you wanted to ask. But if you feel like today's session has run its course and you're done, you're free to sign off on that too. So we can just kind of hang out and see if there's anything anybody wanted to discuss.
I had a question, sorry, kind of the logistics of approaching these conversations. You know, like sometimes maybe you could send an email to like address these issues. Sometimes, you know, it might be better to like set up a meeting. Like, how do you go about approaching that and like deciding like what's the best way to start the conversation? Yeah,
I think context is important. Maybe what has worked in the past? How does your PI like to be approached? Are they? I don't think anybody likes to be blindsided, but I think some people are more, you know, in the moment. I can deal with this. I can go with the flow. Some people, not a lot of people. We all like to we all like that transparency. So I think I'd need a little bit more context, but and always happy to help. But I would go based on what you know has worked in the past with them, how they like to be communicated with.
That sounds good. Yeah. Probably context dependent, and also like maybe it's easier for me to like send an email because I'm super nervous about this issue. So maybe like that's the best open the, communication if like
Yeah.
that's how.
Yeah.
So I would put in a cross plug here for doing some of the DISC training. DISC is a personality assessment that I think is really best used for communication styles. What I see when we look at DISC is that for a lot of faculty, they fall into that D domain, and an email from a faculty member is like no salutation, name, it's just a line, I need this from you here, right? Like, and then that's all that it is. I'm somebody who wants to provide context. I want to tell you the full story. I want to do, and so if I'm communicating from my style, that may not be what resonates with them. And so the more you understand your style and you start to see styles that your advisors may have or other people in the lab may have, and you can start to find that middle ground of, hey, this is on my mind. Could we set up a time to talk about it? That may be the most effective thing to do. And so just, thinking about those differences in communication style and how to utilize those to get what it is that you need, that's another layer to some of this.
I just put in the chat our lunch and learns, a link to our lunch and learns. And Allison, here's one on the DISC that helps you kind of diagnose, like Bruce is saying, like 1-word, 2-word answers, they may be a D. So you want to match styles. So that might be helpful.
The question I had was going back to creating the positive story. And so I know the purpose of that is really to get you said like to get you in a good headspace, but how do you stop yourself from just making excuses for the other person? Like, how do you differentiate between those two? Because I often find that if I make excuses for that person, then I will never address the issue with them.
So I see your point, because I feel like you could say, this person cares a lot about science, and I need to be treated differently or better. But they care about science, and that's just what I'm going to talk about. They care about science. It doesn't excuse behavior. The goal is for you just to be agile. I'm still going to bring up how you treated me. Okay. But what's a positive story that just helps you remain centered and kind of giving off more positive vibes? You're going to choose your words better. Your tone of voice is going to be better. Body language, those types of things.
Okay. I think like in certain conflicts, changing your story can be enough to like resolve that conflict within yourself. Like, for example, we had a bunch of new people coming into the lab at the beginning of the school year, and I was getting really stressed out because it was getting crowded, and we were not really adhering to the restrictions. It was when it was really going up in the community, and so I started getting really stressed out about it. I'm like, okay, how can we better organize schedules, or can I feel more comfortable in this space? And I kind of had to reflect, why do I feel uncomfortable now? I didn't have these reservations before. Like, is it about the situation that's making me feel this way? That like kind of self-reflection was enough to like, okay, I'll just kind of communicate with people a little more and, try to just be more comfortable in the situation. I think, when it comes to a point that it really is affecting, your situation negatively to a point that you can't really tolerate it anymore, that's when it really, needs to be confronted with that person.
Sure,
So,
sure. And being self-reflective is huge. That's a great first step.
So, Emily, thank you for bringing that up, though, because I think that I think that that's actually a really important distinction, and in a way that we haven't necessarily maybe discussed it as clearly as we should, because it's always easy to say, well, faculty are under a tremendous amount of stress, therefore it's they don't get enough sleep, they don't take care of themselves enough, so it was okay, that's why they yelled at me and slammed the door and told me I'm a moron, right? Like, we can tell those positive stories, but there's a line in there that we also have a tolerance for some toxic behavior in academia that we shouldn't.
Yeah.
And so I think the point about, well, at what point do you draw that line and say, doesn't matter what the story is that may lead up to why they did that, it's unacceptable that they did, and that's not okay. And so that's where I think we need to do a better job in academia about calling those kinds of things out, especially when we start talking about the impact of microaggressions that start to come in, right? And things that don't rise to the level of overt policy or law violation, but, just have this wearing down and this, demoralizing effect over time, that those aren't things we just explain away through the process of, creating that positive story. So I think it's important to have clarity around that. I think for this, though, so setting that aside, this can be something that needs to be addressed because it's not acceptable and it's not something that we should tolerate. Right. You're still in a situation in which you need to navigate this space in this world and try to move forward in your career. And so I think orienting yourself around, all right, these are things that need to be, how can I still advocate for myself, given that this is a problem with that, that person has an issue that needs to be addressed separately, that, it's not a this or, it's a this and kind of thing. And so how do you advocate for yourself while still recognizing that there are certain things that you should not try to explain away for that? I was gonna, Lisa and I have a motto for what it takes to have good conduct, but since this would be recording, I don't know if that's something I should put out there into space. Just a guiding principle, just don't be a dick. And I think that so much of people would just like, in this situation, am I being it? Yeah, you are. Okay, then don't do that. It's not complicated how we could improve the environment. But in seriousness, I really do have concern over the academic training environment and the kinds of things that we do tolerate, because, well, yeah, but he's got 5 R01s. So, we're not going to interfere in how they run that lab environment. And there's conduct that I think is just blatantly unacceptable oftentimes, that we just kind of explain away to that. So I think it's a really important point, and I'm really glad that you brought that.
Great. All right, I need to head to another meeting, but thanks so much for all your participation, and please reach out as needed.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, everybody. Bye.